before the chronicles of the Crimson Courts were inked in secrecy, before her name became a warning whispered between kingdoms. There was a girl born beneath a northern sky, fashioned not in tenderness, but in expectation. She was not raised to be loved. She was sculpted to be useful. From the stone halls of Bethenfort to the shadowed banks of the River Tweed, her life was measured in etiquette, alliances, and obligations, a childhood mortgaged to the throne. But the heart, when caged, does not die. It learns to sharpen itself. Welcome to our channel, Tales of Crimson Stars, where shadows breathe and the night remembers. If these whispers of blood and darkness stir your soul, like this video, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell below so the stars may guide you deeper into the eternal night. Chapter 1. The Child of Bethenfort. The year is 1174. Barrowmere sleeps beside the slow grey vein of the River Tweed, its cottages huddled beneath a sky of permanent dusk. Above it all, like a crown hammered out of stone and stubbornness, stands the castle of Bethenfort, seat of King Richard and Queen Matilda. They were not cruel rulers, merely preoccupied ones. Their affections were spent not on their daughter, but on maps, treaties, and the restless ambitions of a small kingdom boxed in by larger, hungrier realms. For them, Isabella was not a child. She was an asset, a promise, a future signature on treaties not yet written. Her nursery was a classroom. Her playthings were scrolls. Laughter seldom visited her chambers, but tutors did. Priests with dry voices, matrons with colder eyes, masters of history, rhetoric, and courtly strategy. If she wept, it was in silence. If she dreamed, it was alone. Under constant surveillance, she learned early that emotion was an error and vulnerability a liability. Praise never came unchained from conditions. Love, when offered at all, was phrased as duty. By the age of 12, the effects had taken root. The warmth that might have softened her had congealed into a refined coldness. Her beauty grew like a winter rose, stunning, immaculate, and edged with frost. She discovered that people could be moved as easily as pieces on a board, provided one learned where to press. Servants whispered that she frightened them more with a smile than with anger. She began to test the limits of her influence, offering rewards with one hand and unspoken threats with the other, arranging small disasters for those who displeased her. A misplaced key, a forgotten message, a dismissal that seemed to appear from nowhere. None could prove it was her. All quietly suspected. Then sickness came. It arrived without ceremony, an invisible fog of fever that sank its teeth into King Richard and Queen Matilda. Priests prayed, physicians bled and burned and dosed, but the monarchs left the world as they had lived in it, busy, distracted, mid-sentence. The kingdom wept. Isabella did not. At 14, she stood in the great hall as the crown of Bethenfort was placed upon her dark hair. The courtiers bowed, the banners hung low in mourning. She felt the weight of gold and obligation settle upon her skull like a verdict. In theory, she would not rule alone. A council of elders, advisors from the northern houses, and the patriarchs of the church would guide her decisions. In practice, they underestimated her. They believed her still a child, manageable, malleable, grateful. They misread the stillness in her eyes. Isabella listened. She nodded when required. She signed what was placed before her. Yet in the chambers of her solitude, she cultivated something her parents had never taught her, a private creed. If she was to be queen, she would not merely inherit Bethenfort. She would remake it. And somewhere far above the River Tweed, the moon took careful note. Chapter 2. The Era of the Blood Moon. By 1196, the chroniclers would later write that a new age had begun, the Era of the Blood Moon. It did not start with prophecy. It started with boredom. Queen Isabella, now a woman in full command of her poise, had spent the years between crown and 22 in a constant performance. Audiences, decrees, alliances, border skirmishes, religious ceremonies, and the wearying theatre of court. Her council believed themselves in control. They were not. Bit by bit, she bent their prudence toward her whims. Laws became flexible. Punishments grew creative. Feasts bled into nights of indulgence that reached beyond mere celebration. Bethenfort, once a modest northern stronghold, began to develop a reputation, a court of beauty and excess, where the queen's favor could turn paupers into lords and lords into exiles with a single arched brow. It was in this climate that Isabella conceived a new amusement disguised as diplomacy, a grand winter gala. She ordered invitations sealed in black and gold wax, bearing the sigil of Bethenfort, dispatched to 4 neighboring realms: the kingdom of Beringen, where woodland folk whispered to ancient trees; the kingdom of Linderoff, land of stone-hearted warriors and dragon-blooded legends; the kingdom of Fidelcourt, perched upon the holy mountain, home to scholars and seers; the kingdom of Cithirin, forged by the iron march of the Black Serpent Legion. The pretext was simple: strengthen ties between kingdoms. The truth was pettier and far more dangerous. Isabella needed a king. Not for love, she considered that a childish superstition. She wanted a consort who would adorn her image, extend her influence, and obey. Soon the roads to Barrowmere grew rich with movement. Carriages engraved with foreign crests rolled through the snows, escorted by knights in polished mail. Musicians arrived with harps and shawms. Servants scurried like nervous shadows. The eastern wing of the castle was transformed into a ballroom of candlelight and polished stone, hung with crimson banners that caught every flicker of flame. The princes arrived in turn. Foxwellian Becket of Beringen, graceful as a stag and twice as cautious. Adalos Linthion of Fidelcourt, eyes full of distant, lofty thoughts. Isaacstone Bexley of Cithirin, stern jaw, soldier's spine, duty-bound to the bone. And at last, Prince Tristan Fasselfort Redmond of Linderoff, tall, composed, with a gaze that carried both iron and pity. From the moment she saw him, Isabella decided. It was not his rank, though Linderoff was strong. It was not his wealth, though his cloak alone could have fed a village. It was the way he looked at the hall, at the people, as if all of it mattered more than he did. A weakness, a crack. She approached him by the column where he lingered with his retinue, wine in hand, observing without clamor. Her gown flowed like spilled ink. Her crown caught the light like a small, exquisite dagger. "Your Highness of Linderoff," she purred, her voice soft as winter fur. "Would you permit a lonely queen to trespass upon your solitude?" He bowed with impeccable grace. "Your Majesty honors me," he replied. His accent carried the rock and river of his homeland. "Your castle is most impressive, and your hospitality beyond reproach. I was just thinking how pleased my fiancé would be to see such splendor." The word fell like a stone into still water. For an instant, something flickered behind Isabella's eyes. Then she smiled, a perfect, practiced crescent. "A fortunate woman," she said lightly. "Bethenfort prides itself on exceeding the expectations of its guests. Yet she is not here this evening. And you are." She let the sentence linger, like a hand resting just too long upon a sleeve. "We might find a quieter place to talk," she continued, voice lowering. "The noise of celebration is charming, but truly meaningful conversation rarely survives it. I have guest chambers, more private." Tristan's gaze did not linger on her lips, nor her jewels. It drifted over the hall to his attendants, to the gathered nobles whose futures hinged upon every rumor. "You are gracious beyond measure," he said at last, "but I must decline. My time in Bethenfort is brief, and my duty is to remain among those I represent. Besides, my fiancée awaits my return. I would not have her wondering why her betrothed lingers too long beneath another sovereign's roof." Isabella's smile thinned. Duty, she echoed. How admirable. It is the anchor of a kingdom, Your Majesty, he replied gently, and of a man. For a heartbeat, the music seemed to dull. The candles hissed. Then Isabella laughed, a sound like glass chiming. Then let us not tempt your anchor to drift, she said. Enjoy the ball, Prince of Linderoff. Perhaps fate will be less strict with us on another night. She turned away with perfectly measured grace. Only when she reached the shadowed corridor beyond the ballroom did the mask crack. Hands clenched, jaw tight. She pressed her forehead against the cold stone and whispered through gritted teeth, "You will be mine, Tristan Fasselfort Redmond. If not in life, then in something far more enduring." Outside, the moon rose copper and red, and the era of the blood moon truly began. Chapter 3. The Puppet Crown. Time in Bethenfort learned to walk in circles. The morning years passed. The council grew nervous. Neighboring kingdoms watched with sharpened interest. A young queen without a king is a throne with a visible crack, and predators, political and otherwise, are drawn to fractures. Suitors came and went. Isabella entertained them like actors on a stage she did not respect. Their compliments slid off her like dull blades. Some were handsome, some rich, some pious, but none were worthy. Worthiness to Isabella did not mean virtue. It meant usefulness. In the end, she chose without romance, without even curiosity. He was a discarded nobleman of the old clergy, a man whose ambitions had wilted before they had time to bloom. Once destined for a bishop's seat, he had resigned in disgrace when whispers of unsanctioned affection for the queen drifted through the cloisters. He adored her with a sincerity she found both tedious and convenient. He wrote poetry. She never read it. He prayed for her soul. She misused his faith as cover. He wore the title of king. She wore the power. The wedding was a spectacle of gold and incense, a marriage of appearance rather than hearts. The people cheered because they were told to. The council sighed in relief. At last, the monarchy looked complete. But Isabella did not feel completed, only contained. Her days filled with ritual, audiences, signatures, ceremonial hunts, sanctified meals. Her nights, however, grew emptier. Pleasure dulled. Intrigue bored her. Even cruelty, when unopposed, loses its flavor. In that widening hollow, another thought began to coil. Prince Tristan, with his stubborn honor and unreachable heart. Rejected desire is not an emotion easily forgotten. In Isabella, it fermented into obsession. She began to dream of him, not as he was, but as she would have him, stripped of his inconvenient conscience, bound not by duty but by her will alone. One evening, as the winter winds clawed at the castle walls, she summoned her most trusted captain. "Go down to the valley," she commanded. "There are whispers of women there, witches. Fetch me 4 who know more of the dark than the church will admit exists. Bring them here quietly. Tell them the queen is prepared to pay for miracles." The captain paled, but he did not argue. One does not correct a queen who speaks as if she has already passed sentence. Within days, 4 figures were led through a side gate under hooded cloaks, bent-backed crones, eyes like burnt embers, hands stained with herbs, ash, and older things. They were taken not to the chapel, but below, into the bowels of Bethenfort, where forgotten tunnels coiled like stone serpents. The chamber prepared for them was lit by iron braziers and ringed with ancient sigils half erased by time. Once it had been a crypt, now it would host a different kind of death. Isabella descended alone. Her husband was at prayer. Her counselors believed her at rest. Only the walls bore witness as she stepped into the circle the witches had drawn. "Kneel," the eldest rasped. Isabella's eyes flashed. She had not knelt to anyone since her coronation, yet something in the air, heavy, metallic, almost sentient, pressed against her pride. With a slow, deliberate motion, she bent her knees. The witches produced bowls of black iron, already filled with water drawn, they claimed, from a cursed well, where no reflection would ever form. Each woman pricked her finger, letting blood fall into the water. The bowls darkened, thickened, began to shimmer. Then they took Isabella's left hand. Her skin had never known labor. Their nails were cracked and stained. The contrast made the wound almost ceremonial. When her blood struck the surface, the air changed. The torches leaned inward, flames bowing as if before a sovereign older than crowns. The stone underfoot trembled, a low, grinding complaint. A sound rose from the bowls, not quite a voice, not quite a shriek. The vowel-less howl of a language spoken before men learned to name their gods. The witches began to chant. Their words, a Mesopotamian darkness dragged from the mud of forgotten rivers. The liquid thickened, climbing the edges of the bowls like something trying to escape. Shadows lengthened, overlapping until the room seemed submerged. Then the bowls stilled. From their surfaces rose a shape, a torso made of liquid night, eyes like coals buried deep in ash. Its outline shifted, as though it were remembering what a body was meant to be. When it spoke, its voice did not echo. It simply existed everywhere at once. "You have summoned," it murmured, "a harbinger of the deep darkness. Not a king, not a demon of petty pacts, but the current beneath all bargains men are too afraid to name." Isabella's heart raced, but her chin did not tremble. "Then hear my wish," she said. "I have ruled alone. I have married a shadow. I have bent a kingdom. But there is one who denied me. I want him, Tristan of Linderoff. I want his heart, his will, his eternity aligned with mine. Make him mine, and make my joy unassailable." The entity regarded her, not with curiosity, but with an ancient weariness. "You speak the language of children," it replied. "You ask for happiness, as if it were a coin to be minted. Listen well, Queen of Bethenfort. You shall have your king, and you shall burn in pleasures that do not know the mercy of dawn. You shall walk through centuries while others crumble, but your story will not bring peace to any heart, not even your own." "What is peace to a woman who has never been allowed it?" Isabella shot back. "I have suffered restraint my entire life. I will not suffer it in eternity. Name your price." The shadows tightened around her like a cloak drawing itself. "The price is simple," the being said. "Your life as you know it, your place among the living. You will drink of this draught, and your body will fall into a darkness no priest can illumine. When you rise, you will belong neither to heaven nor to earth, neither fully dead nor truly alive. You will hunger, you will rule, you will be feared, and love will never again mean what you think it does now." Isabella's lips curved. "Then pour," she whispered. "I have been half alive for years. I would rather be fully monstrous than permanently incomplete." The witches lifted the bowl. The liquid within was no longer water, but something thicker, black-red, smelling of iron and endings. She took it without trembling and drank. The world inverted. Pain did not simply strike, it rewrote her. Her veins turned to rivers of molten ice. Her lungs forgot how to want air. Her heart clenched once, twice, and then refused to beat for anything so fragile as time. Isabella fell, crown clattering across the stone. Somewhere above, the bells of Bethenfort tolled the hour, but below, in the crypt, a different clock had begun to tick. Chapter 4. The Queen of Crimson Malison. Hours passed. The witches waited in their circle, neither speaking nor moving, their faces turned toward the still figure on the floor, as if listening for a sound no human ear could catch. Then, at last, Isabella opened her eyes. They were no longer the cool, calculating blue of a northern noblewoman. They were crimson, a deep, luminous red, like garnets held before a candle, or blood seen through stained glass. For a moment, she did not breathe at all. Then, with a slow, unnecessary inhalation, she sat up. The air tasted different. The stone tasted different. The witches, crouched nearby, smelled not of sweat and herbs, but of life, rich, pulsing, hot. Hunger rose in her like a choir. The eldest witch smiled, a thin, knowing stretch of cracked lips. "Rise, your majesty," she croaked. The human part of your reign has ended. The rest is yours to write." Isabella stood. Her limbs felt weightless, her senses sharpened to a painful clarity. She could hear the drip of water 3 corridors away, the scrape of a rat's claw in the wall, the distant murmur of soldiers changing watch in the courtyard above, and beneath it all, the thunder of hearts. "Leave," she said softly. The witches gathered their bowls, their incantations spent. They had been paid, in coin, in power, and in the unspoken promise that Bethenfort would never again be a safe place for priests to mutter sermons about sin. They shuffled away, leaving the queen alone in the semi-dark. A guard waited at the door to the crypt. He had been loyal for years, had once placed his cloak upon mud so that her slippers would not stain. When she stepped toward him now, he straightened, hand to breastplate. "Your Majesty, is the rite concluded? Should I summon—" He never finished the sentence. In a blur of movement that even she had not anticipated, Isabella closed the distance, her hand clamping over his mouth, her other arm flinging him into the shadows. His eyes flared with confusion, then terror, as her lips found the pulse at his throat. The first taste was an apocalypse. Blood rushed into her like stolen sunlight. It was warmth, memory, strength, and something far older, like drinking the echo of a heartbeat struck at the dawn of the world. The guard's struggles weakened, then ceased. When she finally withdrew, his body slid bonelessly to the floor. She looked at her hands. They did not shake. A slow smile unfurled across her face, almost reverent. "Now," she murmured, "I am finished being denied." In the days that followed, Bethenfort changed in ways the common folk could not quite name, but felt in their bones. Servants began to grow paler, yet never seemed to tire. Certain members of the night watch stopped eating altogether, yet their eyes gleamed with unnatural clarity in the dark. A new guard was posted in the halls, silent men and women who moved without sound, whose gazes lingered too long on exposed throats. One by one, Isabella chose those whose loyalty was absolute, or whose disappearance would raise too many questions. Some were transformed with a ritual's care, others in moments of impatience and hunger. In the grand scheme of eternity, what was one more throat in the shadows? Her husband, the Hollow King, noticed something was wrong. He remarked on her lack of appetite, the renewed bloom in her cheeks, the way the candles seemed to gutter when she entered a room. He tried to speak with her about the state of her soul, about salvation, about the mercy of God. "Mercy," she echoed one evening, turning a ruby ring upon her finger. What an exquisite word for those who have the luxury of fear. "You speak as if you have none," he replied. She looked up, her eyes, behind their careful blue illusion, stirring with hidden red. "My dear," she said sweetly, "I have moved beyond the reach of anything as small as fear." He did not understand. He would not have time to. By the time rumors began to spread beyond Bethenfort's borders of a court that did not sleep, of guests who entered feasts but were not seen leaving, the transformation was complete. Isabella was no longer merely Queen of Bethenfort. She was something else, something hunger had crowned in place of God. And in the north, beneath dragon banners and unknowing stars, the realm of Linderoff prepared a ball to which she was most pointedly not invited. Chapter 5. The Uninvited Sovereign. The invitation that never arrived was louder than any insult spoken aloud. Linderoff announced a grand celebration, a ball to honor alliances, to bless the coming heir, to display before friend and rival alike the stability of its beloved king, Tristan Fastlefort Redmond, and his soon-to-be queen. Bethenfort received no summons, no heralds, no scrolls wrapped in silk. It was a statement. The North did not consider Isabella's court safe. When word reached her, carried by a trembling messenger who could not quite meet her gaze, Isabella listened in silence. The hall around her was heavy with tapestries and shadows, her new court of half-hidden predators standing at attention. "A ball," she said at last. and not even the courtesy of a forged excuse. How bold! The messenger swallowed. Your Majesty, I am certain it is an oversight. The journeys in winter, She rose from her throne. Spare me the embroidery, she said. If there is to be a ball in Linderoff, then I shall attend. After all, her lips curved. What is a celebration without a little surprise? Preparations were swift and secret. The royal carriage was readied, more for appearance than necessity. The Queen chose a gown of deep black velvet edged in crimson, a crown of dark metal that swallowed more light than it reflected. Her retinue was small, at least to the human eye. To those attuned to other currents, the air itself traveled with her. When the carriage reached the gates of the castle of Linderoff, the guards saw it approach through the winter mist, lanterns glinting off its gilded edges. They lowered pikes, confused. Their masters had invited no foreign monarchs. One stepped forward, hand to the latch. State your... The door swung open. To emptiness. No queen, no attendants, only the echo of a laugh, carried like perfume on the cold air. Inside the ballroom, the celebration was nearing its height. Chandeliers blazed with 100 candles. Musicians wove reels and waltzes into the fabric of the night. Nobles in rich fabrics turned beneath banners of dragon and stone. At the head of it all stood King Tristan, a man both seasoned and softened by the weight of true responsibility. His fiancée, a gentle, bright-eyed noblewoman from a neighboring house, stood at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. It was then that the candles flickered, one by one. Flames dipped and bowed as if swept by an unseen wind. The musicians faltered. A chill slipped into the hall, subtle at first, then absolute, until every breath exhaled became a ghost. From the upper gallery, a voice descended. Forgive my tardiness, it purred. It appears my invitation lost its way. Tristan looked up. There she stood, Isabella Bethenfort, framed by stone arches and shadows, her gown drinking the light, her eyes aglow with a red that no human iris had ever claimed. Behind her, like a darkened choir, stood several figures, silent, unmoving, their faces too pale, their smiles too sharp. "Guards!" Tristan snapped. "Remove her from this hall! Now!" They moved as trained, swift, disciplined, with steel drawn. They never reached her. With a lazy flick of her wrist, Isabella released a force that was not wind, not magic as any scholar would recognize, but will weaponized. The soldiers were thrown back as if struck by unseen hammers, crashing into columns and tables, gasping, stunned. Gasps rose from the assembled nobles. "Isabella," Tristan said, his voice measured but lined with steel, "whatever quarrel you imagine exists between us, this is not the place for it. You will leave at once, or you will what, Your Majesty?" she interrupted, beginning her slow descent down the staircase. "Have me escorted out. You tried that once already, if memory serves. It did not improve my opinion of your manners." His fiancée clutched his arm, whispering his name. He placed her gently behind him. "What do you want?" Tristan asked. There was no diplomacy in his tone now, only weary understanding. "Name it, and I will tell you plainly whether it can be given." She smiled, and for a moment the girl from Bethenfort, wounded, ignored, flickered behind the monster she had become. "I want," she said, "to correct an error. You denied me once in my own hall, Tristan. You chose an invisible fiancée over the queen whose roof sheltered you. Tonight, I have come to reclaim my dignity." "You mistake obsession for dignity," he replied. "You are not the first sovereign to confuse the two." Her eyes flared. "And you," she said softly, "are not the first man to believe his refusal has no price." With a speed the human mind could scarcely register, she was upon him. He reached for his sword. She twisted his wrist until bone cracked. He staggered. She held him upright, almost tenderly, her lips near his ear. "Do not be afraid," she whispered. "You once taught me the value of duty. Allow me now to teach you the value of submission." Her teeth sank into his throat. The hall erupted. Screams, crashing glass, the crash of fleeing feet. Yet before anyone could reach them, it was already too late. Tristan's struggles slowed, then ceased, his lifeblood spilling like a dark offering upon her lips. She did not drain him entirely. No. Isabella lifted his limp form and carried him to the balcony that overlooked the courtyard, every step measured, every movement deliberate. The crowd, drawn by horror as much as by fear, followed at a distance. There, beneath the watching stars, she held him aloft like a macabre blessing. "Behold your beloved king," she called, her voice ringing like a bell. "He refused my hand in life. He shall not refuse it in eternity." Then, lowering him gently, she pressed her wrist to his mouth. Blood, her blood, fell like a final benediction. His body shuddered. Inside the hall, her followers moved. Servants, knights, guests, those who ran were hunted. Those who resisted were silenced. Those whose fear curdled into a darker curiosity found themselves offered a choice: die as they were, or rise as something new. By dawn, Linderoff had ceased to be a human kingdom. Its dragon banners fluttered over ramparts guarded by creatures whose eyes gleamed red in the dying moonlight. Isabella stood at the high window, watching the first grey smear of morning. Two kingdoms, she mused. Bethenfort by birth, Linderoff by right of conquest. It seems eternity will not be as dull as I once feared. Behind her, somewhere in the keep, Tristan's first scream as a newborn predator cut through the stone. She smiled. "Welcome home, my king," she cunningly whispered. Chapter 6. The Elder and the Law. It began with a child, not a princess, not a prophesied heir, just a little girl in a torn blue dress, clutching a wooden toy horse whose painted legs had long since broken. She had hidden beneath the staircase during the night's carnage, heart pounding so loudly she thought it must surely betray her. By morning, the castle reeked of blood and smoke. The music had fallen silent. The tapestries hung stained. The girl crept from her hiding place, only to find herself frozen by the sight at the top of the stairs. Queen Isabella, framed in daylight like an ink stain on parchment, descending with the calm of someone exiting a chapel. "There you are," Isabella said, voice almost fond, like a little mouse who has outlived the lion's yawn. The girl backed away, shaking, her toy dropping from her fingers and clattering on the stone. "Please," she whispered. I won't tell. I swear it. Please, my lady." Isabella tilted her head. "Do not lie, child. Every survivor tells a story. That is their curse and their purpose." She stepped closer. "But take comfort. You will not suffer the burden of remembering." She raised her hand. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, and then she was gone. Not the girl, but the queen's grasp. A rush of wind, a blur of movement, and a second figure now stood between them, the child cradled safely in an unfamiliar arm. "I am afraid," a smooth voice said. "That is not a kind way to treat children." Isabella's eyes narrowed. The man who faced her was no local lord. His very presence altered the air. He was tall, dressed not in the fashions of Linderoff or Bethenfort, but in garments of deep, ageless black, trimmed in muted gold. His skin bore the faint, unnatural pallor she recognized as her own now. His eyes, however, were something else entirely, ancient, measuring, touched with an irritation too calm to be mortal. "And who," Isabella asked, each word cold and precise, "presumes to interrupt the will of a queen in her own conquest?" He inclined his head with a courtesy that was somehow more threatening than open hostility. "Allow me to introduce myself," he said. "I am Larkian Faceroth Mortelos, of the ancient vampire high royal caste." The name fell with the weight of a stone into deep water. Isabella had never heard it spoken, but some part of her, some newly awakened predatory instinct, recognized the rank behind it. This was no fledgling, no cursed courtier. This was one who had stood in halls before her ancestors had learned to walk. "I have come," Larkin continued, gently setting the trembling girl behind him, "to discuss manners in a civilized fashion." "Manners," Isabella echoed, incredulous. "I have just bound 2 kingdoms beneath my will. I have refashioned a mortal realm into something greater. And you wish to lecture me on etiquette?" He stepped down one stair, unhurried. "You have bound nothing, Your Majesty," he said softly. "You have merely disturbed what was previously in balance. We were content to watch you play at power in Bethenfort. Your hunger there, though regrettable, did not upset the older designs. But now you have swallowed Linderoff whole, without regard for the law." She laughed, sharp as a knife. "Law? There is no earthly law that can bind me now." Larkian's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "I do not speak," he replied, "of earthly laws." In a movement so slight it seemed almost an afterthought, he reached out and lifted her chin with one finger. The gesture was not rough, yet she could not pull away. It was as though the very air had conspired against her. "Listen well, fledgling queen," he said, his voice dipping into a tone that carried centuries. "You are not the first to drink a forbidden draught and call herself eternal. There were others before you. Kings, priests, lovers, monsters. Most are ash now." Her eyes flashed crimson. "Remove your hand," she hissed, "or I shall remove your head and drink from the stump." Larkian regarded her with something almost like pity. "I am here in peace," he said, releasing her at last, "by order of Elder King Seraphiel, who ruled in shadow before your grandparents' bones had cooled. He bids me remind you that the blood you now carry is part of an order greater than your wounded pride." He drew from his coat a scroll, sealed in a wax so dark it seemed to absorb the light. Its ribbon was crimson, its surface marked with sigils that prickled at the edges of Isabella's new senses. "This," he said, holding it out, "contains the laws of the crimson kind. You will read them. You will obey them. You will temper your indulgences. And if I do not?" she asked quietly. "Then," Larkin replied, "your next visitor will not be me." He glanced around the ruined hall, the torn banners, the broken bodies, the newly turned vampires standing in uncertain clusters like children after a storm. "You will be permitted," he continued, "to rule both Bethenfort and Linderoff for now. 2 kingdoms under one nocturnal crown. Consider it an experiment. But know this: your sovereignty exists only under the watchful gaze of the ancient vampire high royal castes. Should you endanger the secrecy of our existence, challenge our hierarchy, or defy the laws written in this scroll, your eternity will be revised. Violently." Isabella took the scroll. It felt heavier than it looked. "You expect me to kneel," she said, "after I have just taught a king the cost of refusing me?" "I expect you," Larkin answered, "to learn the distinction between ruling mortals and surviving among immortals." He turned, then paused, glancing back at the little girl still trembling by the stair. "This child will be taken far from here," he added. "Her memories of this night will fade into nightmare, then into nothing. The world above cannot yet endure the sight of what you have become." He looked once more at Isabella, his gaze like a blade being returned to its sheath. "Clean this mess," he said softly. "Restrain your hunger, read the law, and remember, young queens are not executed for their first mistakes. They are watched." With that, he was gone, not with fanfare, nor with a swirl of cloaks. One moment he stood there, the next, the hall seemed slightly more empty, the air slightly less aware of itself. Isabella remained on the staircase, scroll in hand, rage and fascination warring behind her crimson eyes. 2 kingdoms bowed beneath her name. Yet somewhere beyond her reach, an older throne had just marked her down as a novice. Slowly, she broke the seal. The parchment unfurled, revealing lines of script in an ink that shone like dried blood. As her eyes moved over the first of Seraphil's laws, a realization settled coldly into her immortal bones. She had not, in truth, seized a crown. She had stepped into a game whose rules were written long before Bethenfort drew its first breath. And the only thing more dangerous than hunger was eternity, with someone else keeping the ledger.